We are going to transition now into our fireside chat, accountability, innovation, and real-world outcomes. I'm going to invite Bart Caylor back up to the stage, and joining him is Michael Bettersworth, the CMO of Texas State Technical College, and our moderator for this fireside chat, Brian Gross, the VP of Enrollment Management and Athletics at Hartwick College, and the host of Visionary Voices on Enrollify, one of our newest podcasts geared towards presidents. So that's a really good one to just like maybe accidentally send a link to your president to. Oh, just saying. All right, here we go.
Hello.
Take it away.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. Great job, Bart. So
Thank
much
you.
provocative content out there. And Bart started his session and he talked about externalities that are impacting particularly enrollment management today, talking about declining demographics, this change in consumer mindset. I might add this concept of unsustainable tuition discounting practices and how that's impacting institutional finances. Today, we're going to talk about three high-level categories and frame them in the context of the challenges that we're experiencing. We're going to talk about accountability, we're going to talk about innovation, and we're going to talk about career outcomes and really speaking to our students and providing the outcomes that they want. And just one piece before we kind of dive in there, as we think about what's happening in the here and now, we have both domestic challenges and international challenges hitting us right in the here and now. So we have the FAFSA issue, right? We're still 13% behind in year-over-year FAFSA challenges. That's in the context in the domestic market of more students filling out the common application when we know there are fewer high school graduates. And as I look at the data that's starting to emerge post June 1, the kind of new deposit deadline, there are many schools that are down in enrollment, and we're starting to see trends that enrollment right now is lower than the first year of COVID-19. And then international enrollment, we're also experiencing some pretty significant headwinds with challenges in Australia and the UK and Canada, which might seem like an opportunity for the US, but the lack of a unified national strategy around international enrollment management creates these challenges. So let's talk about accountability, and from both of your perspectives, both from the institutional perspective, and then of course as a service provider. We talked a little bit before this session about two types of accountability. You have this epistemology of accountability, which is, of course, if you have a contract and somebody owes you something and you don't receive it, well, you're accountable to deliver that. So maybe that's financial or other metrics. And then more interestingly, if you do workshops with your staff, there's this ontology of accountability, which is the accountability of relationships and how people are motivated to take action based on this feeling. So I'm going to start with you, Bart, and as you kind of see what's happening and the challenges of higher ed, talk to me about some ways in which you help institutions think about accountability to students.
I think a lot of times the accountability of students starts with just the relationship building. I think sometimes being able to really listen and hear what the students are needing and be able to ask their questions. There was some discussions in the first keynote this morning about the idea of providing a roadmap to people so that they understand what's going through. And I think that the idea of one of the accountabilities that we can do as enrollment professionals is be able to communicate and build those relationships and build those trusts so that people know what to expect. I know this year was a really hard one because of FAFSA, because no one knew what to expect. The professionals didn't know what to expect. The students, the families didn't know what to expect. And I think that's part of what the meltdown was, is there wasn't any communication. There wasn't any clear direction. And so the accountability fell apart. And so I'm a really big believer in that relationship and that communication, especially from the financial standpoint. Now, I think it also bleeds across in that same idea with the relationships, with the idea of the accountability with your team and with the people that you're representing. So I'm a big believer that the more that you can communicate, the more that you can build those relationships and build that trust, that's going to help in the accountability. I'm not sure if that gets into some of your question, Brian, but I mean, there are certainly metrics and KPIs you can put into place, but I think it has to start with a lot of that.
Great. What's your perspective on this, Michael, from the institutional side?
So, I mean, as a technical college, and this is true for most of higher education, which has a lot of diversity and mission fit, one of the things we share in common, I think, is that the students that come to us self-identify the main reason they're coming, and I think the thing that we need to be very accountable for is job outcome. right? So as marketers in this space, our job isn't just to recruit the student, for example. It's advising. Is this a good decision? You know, you want to be a nurse. How much do you know about nursing? Well, my brother was saved by a nurse. You know nothing about nursing. You've got a heroic view of it. What do you know about nursing? Well, my mom's a nurse. You know everything. So that role of accountability towards job placement from the very front end, not selling college, not recruiting, but advising is a really, I think, critical part. Our college is paid by the state of Texas based on the earnings of our students, not on enrollment. That's 60% of our revenue is based on commission, effectively. So we're financially incentivized to really be accountable for that.
Right. What an interesting idea, just to kind of think about this for a second. And going back to the FEFS issue, how many people in the room are following or thinking about gainful employment and what might be happening? All right, a couple. Maybe something to kind of think about after this, because there is a hypothesis that part of the Department of Education's revamping of the free application for federal student aid has been to kind of move towards, in the next couple years, changes in gainful employment that would tie accountability to institutions to be able to show net costs and career placement and career outcomes. So think about that. I mentioned unsustainable tuition discounting practices. You have this high tuition, high discount, declining net tuition revenue. And if the federal government starts saying to schools that your ability to offer financial aid will be tied to being transparent on your net costs and tying that into job outcomes, what do you think about that idea? Do either of you think that's coming? Or
I think that the Ted Mitchell and the prior couple of administrations back did a great job with gainful employment. They had one mistake. They didn't apply it to all of Title IV.
Yep.
So bring it back.
And Bart, as you work with so many different institutions, is some of the concepts that Michael's talking about, these concepts of really clear career outcomes and being held accountable to produce that, is that something that clients are asking you? Or
yeah, I think it's a little bit different. A lot of times, a lot of the clients I work with are private institutions, so I'll give a little bit of the private side of that, because I think Michael brings up a really good point from the accountability from a state-funded agency. But I think it's also really important from private institutions to recognize there's accountability, because the number one questions mom and dad are going to ask are, what kind of job is my kid going to get? And are we going to see a return on the investment, especially if the sticker price seems higher than the state institutions, where in reality, back to Brian's point about the discount rate, many times it's about on equal par. And so I think there's a responsibility for the clarity of that in the way that we communicate and the way that we talk about that. Much like what Michael said, I think that privates have to do the same thing. Now, whether or not that gets tied into everything, I don't know. I mean, I don't think that's necessarily a bad idea, but I also think sometimes it gets to be a slippery slope from my personal perception if all we're doing is just doing job training, as opposed to what historically private institutions would lean into, the 4-year model of growth of individuals and that time that they spend in college and what that is beyond just job placement. So
I might take a bit of issue with that.
And you're the technical college.
It feels like we're minimizing that in job training colleges we are teaching attention to detail and showing. I bristle at that.
That's okay.
That dichotomy. I think that dichotomy doesn't serve us well, Frank. Sorry.
And I didn't mean to say that in that way. My point was more about the fact that if all we do is put emphasis on the outcomes without understanding what else is put in at any college, I'm a little bit fearful that might lead to some unwanted results.
Yeah. Hey, listen, it'll be much more engaging if you continue to see things from different perspectives.
Fireside chat or debate.
or takedown.
I do have one more piece about accountability, and then I'd like to move on to the topic of innovation. But Bart, I was struck during your talk about this idea of a leadership gap. And as somebody who's been a chief enrollment, chief marketing, chief athletics officer, we feel the pressure, right? I think somebody earlier today said, no one wants to be a VP. It was Jamie. All you do is sit in meetings. So talk about that accountability, particularly amongst vice presidents at college and universities. Is that fair? Should these leaders, these vice presidents, continue to be held accountable in the context of all these challenges if enrollment or retention is missed? Should it be, hey, the revenue doesn't come, we're going to kind of flip the page on you and see if someone else could do it better?
I might change a little bit of that perspective because yes, that's reality that's there. I mean, it's in business, it's everywhere. I mean, but at the same time, when you were starting to pose that question, the first thing I thought is that the responsibility of the CMO or the VP or whoever the leader is to be able to educate the rest of the cabinet and the board on the realities of situations. I think many times, just as I illustrated with the idea of the budget line of somebody spending $1 million and not understanding the digital marketing that they're buying, we have to make sure that as leaders we know what the tools are that we're using. We know how to use the tools. We know how to articulate those to leadership and to ones that we're being held accountable to, so that we have something to say when somebody says we need more billboards.
I think to add on to that, if you say accountability and you're going to hold that leader accountable, that means they have to have some level of authority.
Right.
And so, in our college, we have a discussion about, I'm going to use the word products, don't bristle, but if there's not a market demand for a particular program and we're forced to sell it, or we can't address the naming of it or the pricing of it, then the accountability can't be there either. So we really have to have shared ownership of what programs we're offering. How are we packaging? How are they priced? How are they named? If we're going to hold that leader then accountable for it.
That's great. You set this up perfectly, Michael. That's the perfect transition for us to talk about innovation. And I'd love to give the audience a sense of what each of you, either see or are doing that is really innovating in the market, of course, particularly focused on AI. And so let's start with you, Michael, at your institution at Texas State Technical College. Talk to me about how you're using AI or any other tools to really innovate.
I mean, so Element has obviously been a huge improvement. The Bolt bot has saved us thousands of hours. And, our conversion rate with our previous application, big CRM company, blue letters, was about a 75% of people that clicked apply did not click submit. They abandoned it. And with Element's application, it's a 90% conversion rate. So that alone, which is AI in the background, but just a plug there. The other plug is on our curriculum. So we have about 7,000 industry partners, active industry partners, and about 1,000 industry advisors across 48 different programs and 11 campuses. And that industry advisory group, we use some software called Skills Engine that we created to do skill profiles, and then we'll send that to industry subject matter experts, and they can do validations. So that's been AI, powered technology that we've been using to directly inform our curriculum for the last 7 years or so.
That's great. Thank you, Michael. And Bart, I'm so interested in you. You talk about the micro, the middle, the flagships. I have a real perspective in terms of how in the last 20 years the flagships are gaining considerable market share right below those elite and highly selective. So give us a little range across, from flagship all the way down. What are some innovative things that you're seeing in the market?
Yeah, I think that the innovations, obviously, at the flagship level, I think is leveraging brand better. I mean, I think even the most successful ones right now are using their brand as much like as you would look at like Fortune 500 brands. So I think about Purdue. It was recently named as one of the top, most influential brands in the world, right next to Nike and a few other ones, and that takes effort. So I think that's innovation at the biggest levels. If you go further down, I think it starts to get in the innovation of programs that I think Michael led to. That's something that a lot of people are doing. But I also think that the most agile and maybe the smallest schools are the ones that are adopting AI the fastest, and not only with tools like Element, but also just in being able to say, you know what, let's try doing things with ChatGPT. Let's try things with Claude. Hey, what does this look like if we record a video with Hey Jen and we use a translation into Spanish so that our president can greet the parents of the first generation Hispanic families? There's a lot of innovation that happens, and at smaller schools, they're a little bit more nimble and agile, and there's not as much red tape to go through to try those things. And so I think that I'm seeing a lot of that innovation in those generative AI spots.
All right, are you ready for an impossible question? I'm just kidding. If we think about AI, we think about innovation, let's talk about faculty. How do we get faculty on board to not only be using these tools, but is there a market out there to be offering degrees, bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, doctorate degrees, micro-credential certificates in AI, or has that ship already passed? So I guess that's a two-part question, but talk to me about your opinion on degrees focused on AI and how do you get faculty on board?
Getting faculty on board with, okay, I was going to shift to enrollment because about half of our enrollment is really faculty kind of driven, right? We've got, and retention is hugely driven by that as well. One thing I just want to mention is that because there's not a seat license restriction on Element, our intention is to bring as many of the faculty into the CRM and into the enrollment process. And our Chief Academic Officer just moments ago, by the way, our head of enrollment is here, and Jonathan wants all of the program leads to be in Element. He just texted me, he was upset. Yeah. So we've got pull coming from the faculty side to get more deeply involved in that. And then, AI, whether it's in teaching in the classrooms, this is a tool that's going to be across every vertical. One of our staff has a great comment. He says, if you use AI to replace your job, you're great. But if I use AI to replace your job, not good. And I think that applies to a lot of contexts.
Yeah, I was at the College Board Forum this last November, and there was a admitted 75-year-old math teacher at a community college who teaches alongside AI in his classroom every day. He has it up, and as he's putting out problems, it's giving the answers, and it generated quite a bit of discussion. So, Bart, what is your perspective on faculty use of AI?
I think that faculty AI got introduced through cheating. I mean, if you think about it, at all of our schools, the first time you ever heard the word ChatGPT was probably somebody saying somebody's using ChatGPT to cheat in my class. So part of it is the fact that being able to help people understand that artificial intelligence, generative artificial intelligence, is more than just maybe what they first thought it was. And so I've done a few keynotes at a few in-faculty service days at different colleges and universities. And once they start to see all the different things that generative AI can do and that it is a tool that they don't have to fear, that starts to open up people's minds and they realize, oh, wow, I don't have to be scared of this, or this is something that I could see would benefit my school, or I could see how I could use this to teach. Now, we're certainly going to have to change the way some courses are taught. There's going to, just like when calculators were introduced in the late 60s, math got harder, and so they had to change some things. It's going to be the same thing with generative AI, with the tools that these students will have. We're going to have to, it's going to require the way that we teach students to be differently. And so I think that the faculty are going to be coming around, at least the schools that I've been engaged with faculty, and we have the ability to have those conversations and broaden their minds to see what's available. Those are the ones that are taking to it much quicker. But I think it is going to be a challenge as we look at that, because as we train people in AI, it is such a fast-moving thing. I was recently asked to write the intro for a textbook on generative AI and marketing. And I was flattered to do it, and I said, when will the book come out? And thinking it would be soon. Fall of 25 was the plan. And I was like, I don't know how we're going to write a textbook about using AI and marketing that far out. And so that's going to be the challenge, is because it changes so quickly. I mean, 5 things happened this week alone, and I think a couple things happened today that I just heard about on another Zoom call. It's going to be very difficult to stay ahead of that, to do the right kind of training. That's why I think it's best right now for all of us just to get into it and understand it, and that's where we have to start.
On the cheating thing, there was a recent article that came out that 75% of high school students admit to cheating. And AI is kind of being thrown under the bus for that. But before GPT, when the same survey was done years ago, 75% of high school students were cheating.
Yeah.
So I think what AI does in the classroom there is it really forces you to look at your assessment. And if you're using low-quality assessment, and in the technical field, did you land the airplane is hard to cheat with GPT, right? Is the weld solid? So I think that there's a real revolution to force quality assessment throughout education in the face of these tools that, frankly, should have been there before. I think there's a lot of grade inflation is a very real thing, and so this is going to force greater quality in instruction and mainly in assessment.
It's so interesting. One of my big interests is in collaboration, and as I think about innovation and AI, I did a podcast episode recently with the president and the provost of Chippewa Valley Technical College in Wisconsin, and they have integrated AI, particularly into their nursing curriculum, in such a dynamic way. I got lots of feedback from presidents from schools all over the country about, wow, what an interesting thing. If they can do it, we can do it. But I think their secret ingredient was their collaboration and how not only senior leadership worked together, but how they then brought faculty and staff and students on board in such a clear and solid way that the entire initiative worked in such a bold way. So let's go to our last segment. So we've talked about accountability, we've talked about innovation. Michael, you touched upon it, but I don't think, as you think about Bart, finding your unique place in the market that's unique and distinctive, all the research points to the fact that prospective students and their families expect outcomes, right? They expect connections into the community, they expect to be employed. So let's talk about that engagement. And you touched on it, and maybe this is a place, Michael, for you to start and expand upon how you think about your responsibility in the community to connect your students to meaningful experiences.
I think if we're selling, if the intention of the person taking out a loan and spending time in the classroom is identified as a job outcome, which 97% of them, that's what they identify. Learning something that's interesting is up there too, and they're not mutually exclusive. There certainly can be the same. But if that's the intent, and then we have accountability towards the employment outcomes of that, right? Or else we're party to fraud to some degree, unless something is purely consumptive, and then say so. There are no attributable job outcomes for this, So maybe you want to mitigate your debt a little bit wiser. So, to be selfish on that. So we do a money-back guarantee for a growing number of our programs that if you come to class, accountability, soft skills too, right? Showing up. If you maintain a GPA, and if you go to career services and have a meeting or two there, and you can't get a job 6 months after you graduate, we write you a check. Now you have to get a job offer, things like that. So that's some market differentiation and some real accountability. So is that on track?
I think that's on track, and I'd love to know what are you hearing in the market too. How do schools usually approach you on connecting into the community and helping students with outcomes?
I think a lot of times too, they'll look at different ways to be able to say, how can we get those social proof? How can we go back to our alumni and be able to hear the stories that they're saying so that we can show those things? Because, again, at some of the different types of schools, there are different ways that outcomes are illustrated and shown. And so being able to not only say that we placed them, but this is the kind of student that we placed, this is the type of student that came here, I think is important with those social outcomes and those testimonials. That also helps with your differentiation. So if if one of the differentiators that you're trying to sell is that you are a school that develops, outcomes, but also develops character or something, for some reason you want to hang your hat on that, being able to have those social outcomes to say, not only can we show you the jobs that we place, but this is the testimonials of the people who say, we always want people from that school because of this. So there's a lot of different ways to do that and to be able to show that. I love the money-back guarantee. I think there are other creative ways to think differently about those things so that as people are looking at your school versus other schools, you can give them an offer of something different. Even though you might all be doing outcomes, you might all be showing we've got 98% placement rate. What's different about your placement rate than someone else's?
It's so interesting because location plays a role in that too. Recently talked with Pace University in New York City, San Jose State University, and they have geographic advantage, right? Large metropolitan areas, lots of prospective employers who are mission fit. How should schools that are not in major metropolitan areas, we know students don't always want to go to these large cities, but if you're in a more rural area in the middle of the country, is there a way that those schools could compete with these larger city schools?
So the 11 campuses in our mix are and several of them are in very rural locations, and housing becomes very important. So I think there's a choice between, if the regional commuter shed is pretty small and you don't have housing, well, you're going to be pretty limited into your growth. So housing programs and partnerships with apartments and affordable and safe housing, particularly in some of the urban areas, that it has to be safe housing. So you may not have a dorm operation there because we don't want to have to run dorms, but we have to have a safe environment. So I think then if you're going to have a destination program, so someone's going to, is the job demand regional, Or is that a destination program? We have some programs where they travel to that campus, but there's not a job demand for that particular program in the area. So that changes our recruiting, because we want to recruit from the area where they're likely going to go back to, because they may not want to live in a rural community. So I think those strategies are very multifactorial.
And I would also add too, in the rural areas, being able to work with your state and local governments with workforce development to be able to partner with them and figure out ways that you can market that together. Because, I mean, every state has incentives to keep from the brain drain. They want to keep students in their state. And so you have, there's tools and other partnerships that you can work with that not only can you work with from an administrative standpoint, but also from many times a marketing standpoint as well.
I'm excited. Jeff Zelingo will be speaking tomorrow afternoon, and if you listen to his podcast, he talks about Ascendium, which is a company that work with institutions in more rural areas to help provide that support. So maybe he'll bring a little bit of that up. So what's on the horizon? We have a couple minutes left to go. We've kind of talked about these three areas, and so now I want the two of you to get out your crystal balls and say what's the future for higher ed? And Bart, I'm going to start with you and be a little bit provocative. I mean, is there a place in the market for every type of school that you see out there? These micro schools, these mid-sized schools, the large schools, liberal arts colleges like mine at Hartwick. Is there a place for all of us if we do things right, or are things too far gone? And if you read the rhetoric today, somebody posted, I think in the Chronicle, that schools are closing at a pace right now of one a week. So are things too far gone for some schools to turn things around at this point?
I don't believe so, and that's why I wrote my book, because I think that it has to do with being able to think about things differently and approach things differently. I'm convinced that even the smallest of small schools, I mean, I've worked with schools that have under 25 students. There are 25 people out there somewhere that want what you have. And if you can figure out and articulate that well and be able to go to the places where you're going to find them, it becomes a discovery thing. I think a lot of times we think about the fact that our marketing is limited because, and I hear this too many times, we're just the best kept secret, Bart. I'm like, well, are you the best kept secret for everybody?
Need a billboard.
That's exactly what they say. That's where that conversation goes. But the idea of, are you in front of the people that are really going to make a difference, who want what you have? Because I really believe that if people knew about you, you'd probably be able to fill your class.
I wonder, Bart, just as a follow-up question, we've talked a lot about enrollment, but are institutions talking to you about retention, particularly in the context of revenue? You look at, the numbers, and for many institutions, increased retention is their single greatest opportunity to improve revenue. Do you have prospective clients come to you in that context?
I do, but most of the time it's under the umbrella of enrollment because it's part of it. I mean, part of the challenge with retention, I mean, you can have a great enrollment program, but if your retention, and that includes everybody on campus, it's not just an enrollment responsibility. If that's lacking, it's just, you're pouring it in one way and it's going out the other end. And so you've got to make sure that everybody's on the same page with that. That's why it's important to be cohesive in your leadership and collaborative, that was mentioned earlier, because it's so critical that you do everything together. Everybody's pulling in the same direction.
All right, Michael, you have any prognostications?
Well, man, I don't want to end on a downer, but I think Clayton Christensen's just a little bit off on his time estimate, and we've got demographic cliffs that are happening in some states that are pretty challenging to overcome when your primary customer is shrinking dramatically. 9%, 10% reductions in high school graduations forecast 2027, 28 in some states. That's pretty dire. So I think we'll see more consolidation and more closures. I think the other thing is that we'll see is a greater demand for the customer experience. And what we saw today in terms of redefining the student engagement and the student experience to have a cohesiveness to it and to have a higher degree of empathy. We drag students through an application, through a student information system, through an LMS, through an ATS, maybe if they want to get a job. We drag them through, all these different interfaces and single sign-on and stitches it all together with this. This is a horrible customer service experience. Imagine buying an airplane ticket to Southwest Airlines with 5 different user interfaces. What the hell are we doing? I mean, so I think there's a massive revolution that has to happen in the customer experience, and that every ERP software vendor out there that doesn't listen to that, there's going to be some closures there too.
So interesting. Yeah, that's definitely something I took away. I was recently at a large conference and I saw a lot of larger companies that are kind of shedding employees and other structures. So it's not just higher ed institutions.
Way to
that are
bring us
struggling.
up there right before that.
Well, to close on a positive note, I think we talked about a lot of important things today. We talked about challenges, but we talked about accountability mechanisms, accountability of relationships, actual accountability from a financial perspective. We heard a lot about innovation and how schools are using AI, both at a big and small level. And then we closed talking a little bit about career outcomes, and really interested about what Texas State Technical College is doing in terms of tying outcomes to various funding and such. And I thank you both so much. Michael and Bart, this was really fun to have this conversation with you. Yeah.
Thanks.
All right.